because I was just reading the information about your shared death experience, that new frontier in afterlife research that's going to be on May 15th. I mean, I think this is perhaps one of the newest, if not the way of doing it now, to get people across the nation to hear everybody speak.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Hold on, I'm adjusting my lighting here.
Yeah, I did a whole study about how to look better on the computer.
Okay.
I'm
so
not doing it quite right. You're supposed to put light in front of you.
Yeah,
If you look in they said if it comes from the back, it looks like it's a prison thing. And if it comes from the side, it looks, I don't know, something. But in order to have the best video of yourself,
I know. I'm gonna look at my hair now. It's like, yeah.
Oh, you know what?
What's funny is I've got this. It's like this, unless I put product in it. I mean, I look like I'm trying out for the Jackson 5. I mean, it's. And so, thank God I have a bunch of products, so it's all in there holding it together.
Yeah.
It's funny because my family, they're from southern Italy, the most southernmost portion of Italy. And
Oh.
all my African American friends are like, so Mark, you a brother? Where you get that African hair?
Yeah, that's about it.
Oh gosh, you know.
People are learning a lot when they get their DNA test. Christine Day, you know Christine Day at all? She's a Pleiadian ambassador, and she would let me tell you this, so I'm not telling out of line, but when she got her DNA done, she found out that her father wasn't her father.
Yeah. Oh, it's very surprising for a lot of people. I know one of my cousins had their DNA done, and in the part of Italy that our family's from, it has passed, I mean, the Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Spanish, the French, the Arabs, I mean, the Vikings. And what's really funny is that I look like my grandfather, and he was one of 6 brothers, and we're all over 6 feet tall. And we have this really fair skin. Hello? You know, it's because generally Italians from that region are short, but from the village that we're from, everybody's really tall, and the Vikings ruled it for 350 years. I'm sure they never took any liberties with the female inhabitants, you know. So,
yeah,
that's, you know, we all got to be something, or
that's right.
Lots of something.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That is correct. Well, it's wonderful that we were able to get you, because I know that you're a busy man, and so it's wonderful to have you on the air tonight, or today. I shouldn't say tonight. So is it different hours there in Florida right now for you? Or?
Yeah, it's we're in Eastern time, so it's almost 5 p.m. our time. I believe it's 4 p.m. Central. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll wait for just a little bit for people. There's lots popping out.
Hey, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah. And if anybody comes, when people come to the Hope Interfaith Center, I always tell people, because when they'll say, oh, I didn't RSVP. And I says, really? Do you really believe that I would tell you couldn't come?
Well, you know, that's one of the things I want to touch base with you, Reverend Hope, is that once the pandemic's all under control, and I'm back on tour, I want to get back to Minnesota, and I would love to do a mediumship event at the Hope Interfaith Center. And so, yeah, I would love to do that. Also, I do a lecture series too. I have an ancient mystery series. I have a science and reincarnation, near-death experience, and I do these PowerPoint presentations. But don't think that it's going to be like watching cement dry. I can guarantee it will not be that. So.
Yeah. I didn't think that of you, Mark, at all.
I had enough of that in law school, sitting there. Oh, God. I remember saying, if I ever write a book, I'm never going to do this to anybody.
Yeah. Well, we both were raised Catholic, too, so that was always interesting. But, you know, I'm kind of a ritual girl, so at least I was born with a lot of ritual in my life in the Catholic Church.
You know, the rituals are kind of cool. I mean, they're kind of neat. It's like today, I don't know what it was of Mother's Day. My assistant and I have been taking all the hateful religious fanatics who claim to be Christians. Everyone accusing me of
Yeah.
demonic stuff. And look, I was going to be a priest, all right? So I know my Bible, and I can go toe to toe with them on quotes. But then, what's the point? What's the
Yes.
point of arguing with a religious fanatic?
Yes.
So we just block them and let it go.
Yes. 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 Well, I would like to introduce you. We'll just let the rest pop on. We have quite a few on already, so we'll just let the rest pop on. And I will tell you a little bit about Mark Anthony. Everybody asked me, is he really a lawyer? I invited some of my lawyer friends to pop on with us today, so I hope they do.
So
But
they can ask me legal questions.
yeah, they
Yeah,
probably
no,
could.
I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on television. Yes, I am an attorney. but and we can talk about that.
Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer, who is also known as the psychic explorer. He is a fourth generation psychic medium who communicates with spirits. He is also a successful attorney, licensed to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. Mark graduated from, it's called Mercer, M-E-R-C-E-R. Is that right, Mark?
That is correct.
Mercer Law School with honors, which included the study of law at Oxford University in England. He has also studied mediumship in England at the Arthur Findlay College for the advancement of psychic science. He is the best-selling author of Never Letting Go and Evidence of Eternity. That's the book I read, Evidence of Eternity. His highly anticipated third book is coming. Is that correct? Is that on the market right now, or?
No, it's not on the market. I just finished the manuscript and working with my literary agent about when she's going to start pitching it. So she said, Mark, piece of cake. This one's going to sell. I was like, wow, that's nice to hear.
Yeah, that is nice to hear. Mark has also appeared nationwide on TV and radio shows. He has appeared on national TV, including CBS hit show The Doctors, which I have watched, where information he provided during a reading he conducted and cracked a cold case murder. He is a featured speaker at conferences, expos, and universities, which include Brown, Columbia, Harvard, and Yale. He is continuing the Mark Anthony 2020 Visionary Tour online by appearing on shows worldwide, including the Hope Interfaith Center Zoom Cafe. Yay! Everybody welcome Mark.
Well, thank you, Reverend Hope. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank all the listeners for tuning in today. It's such an honor to be here.
Well, we are recording it. We always have it on our Facebook, so anybody who could not listen to it or get with us this afternoon, I will send you that link as well, Mark. So one of the questions, well, I'm going to ask this question, then I'll ask the second question. As a psychic lawyer, people think at times that the professions kind of are polar opposite, being psychic and being a lawyer. You want to explain that a little bit?
Sure. First off, people tend to think that all psychics were running around in fields of daisies, flinging granola at people. Namaste.
Yes.
They think that, and they also think that all attorneys are, they come out after dark and are vampiric, blood-sucking, heartless monsters, and that's not true. And the problem with the mediums and psychics is that all too often we're not being taken seriously because the history of mediumship has been fraught with fraud. And there are charlatans out there who take advantage of people, and legitimate mediums like yourself and like me and our colleagues and the people that are our friends would never do anything like that. Also, most attorneys that I know are really decent people. We're in this to help other people through some of the most difficult periods of time. And both of my jobs not only revolve on helping people, but also on evidence. Because as an attorney, you have to have evidence to prove your case, to substantiate your position in court. But as a medium, I'm an evidential medium, which means that when I connect with spirits, I have to present pieces of information, facts and verifiable details that I couldn't possibly know to guarantee the authenticity of the contact and to identify who the spirit is. And so when it comes down to it, both careers are about helping people and both careers are about evidence. And the skill sets in one have helped me with the skill sets in the other as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, because I think that's true, that lots of people think that, we've been in this for a while, and I think that people do think that we're granola throwing people. I love that
Yeah,
image.
yeah, well, yeah, it's true. I mean, people come to me all the time and go, "Oh, hi, my name is Jim, but I thought you knew that." And it's like, really? I thought your name was Jerk. But the thing is, and we have to be very careful not to resort to being acerbic and insulting. But it also the problem. Social media is a double-edged sword. It's a beautiful thing because look what we're doing right now. We're able to reach lots and lots of people. We're allowed to be interconnected and to communicate with people when we need to social distance. So technology is solving that. But it also gives cowards a chance to be bullies. I mean, when I look at the type of things that people write on social media, they insult me and they call me demonic. And I'm sure you've had to put up with all that silliness too. And by
Yes.
people, they go, read the Bible. It's like, yes, by all means, read the Bible. Because
Mm-hmm.
they all love to yank quotes out of Deuteronomy and Leviticus about omens and fortune tellers and say that mediums are not of God. But there's also in Deuteronomy 18 verses, I think it's 18 through 22, it says that the standard for what a prophet, which is what mediums are referred to and psychics are referred to in the Bible, is truth. And that if what the prophet speaks is true, then it comes from God. And then if you go to 1 Corinthians 4 verses 4 through 12, it explains in detail the many gifts of the Spirit, the gifts from God, two of which are prophecy, and the other is discernment of spirits. And then if we go to Romans 12, verses 6 through 8, it very, very clearly says that we all have gifts from God. And if your gift is one of prophecy, then prophesize in accordance with your faith. So while the hateful, I call them the salad bar Christians, and they're not really Christians, they're religious fanatics. True Christians don't judge, but religious fanatics do. The question one must ask is, which one are you? So if you go through the Bible taking the salad bar approach to pick and choose which verses you want, you're engaging in the ultimate act of ego, because what you're doing then is creating God in your own image so that he gets to hate the same people you do. And the Bible teaches through metaphor and through parable, like Jesus did. And it isn't about it, and it isn't to teach people to hate and be bigoted and full of anger. But you can find passages throughout that will justify slavery, that will justify killing, that will justify warfare. But the people that want to judge others, which there's a whole lot about judging others in there too, seem to gloss over that so that they can focus on the passages that fit into their own ego-driven and all too often political agendas.
Mm-hmm. When you see spirits, how do you see them? How do they come to you when they come to you?
Well, when I open up the frequency, because the other side is a parallel dimension that runs, coexists with ours. It's like AM and FM radio are occupying the same space, but they're on different frequencies. So when I open up my brain to higher frequencies, first I kind of get this tingly sensation, and that's when I know they're connecting, because spirits are pure electromagnetic energy, and their energy is interfacing with the electromagnetic field of my neural network. Okay, so that's why when people get cold chills and tingles and feel that there's a spirit around, and initially I'll get a gender, then I'll get an idea of the relationship to the person that I'm doing the reading for. Then I may get a visual on them, usually what they look like before they pass. And when people ask, like you just asked, Reverend Hope, now, what do they look like? Well, I want to ask all the listeners to think about the Empire State Building. Okay, now, do you all see it in your mind's eye? You're all seeing it in your mind. That's generally how I see spirits. They appear within my mind as a vivid mental image, very much like a memory. And for example, somebody may see the Empire State Building maybe a little bit more blue than I do, or maybe somebody sees it a little bit more brown. And so there may be differences, but we can all agree what we're seeing. And then they're going to transmit all types of information to me. Not only will I see things, but I will hear messages, hear things, have physical sensations. I usually pick up on how people died and on medical conditions. I'll taste things and I'll know things. So it's a multifaceted array, and it's really quite interesting. Even though I do this pretty much every day, I mean, occasionally I do take a day off because it's exhausting, but it is a really fascinating experience, and spirits are just as diverse as humans. Some communicate more visually, others more auditory, others more through sensory feelings, sensations.
Huh. Huh. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit later about right now there is a lot of grief happening upon the planet, with the whole epidemic.
Sorry, something happened to your audio.
Okay, I'm going to see if maybe I have paper on top.
There you go. You're better now. Okay.
There's so much grief that's happening right now, and one of the questions that came in to ask you, since you're a medium, is, are you getting a information, a whiff of an idea of what's happening to those souls that are indeed leaving the planet through coronavirus when they're in the hospital by themselves? Are they just, what's your...
Well, that's a very good question. I've actually had two friends, two gentlemen who died, and in both cases, their wives were not allowed to be with them when they died because it was suspected that they were dying of COVID-19. And in neither case, the men were. And it was really frustrating I mean, can you imagine? My friend Jan, her husband Butch died. They've been married for decades. And she said, I couldn't even be there to hold his hand. And my friend Andrea, she and Sean have been married for 30 something years. And they were a trip, they were Jewish, but they were bikers, but they were just the sweetest people. And she said, thank God for technology, because when we did Sitting Shiva, we did it on Zoom. And she said, wow, there were people from all over the world there. But what I'm finding is that I'm not getting a lamentation of the spirits who have died. And what happens is, that's us. And humans, and this is perfectly understandable, we get very caught up in the death and dying of our loved ones. As we watch them deteriorating from a lengthy disease, or if they're in a horrific accident, or in a case like this with COVID, where it's dying from the coronavirus is a very painful death. And so we tend to focus on that. Spirits have an entirely different view of their transition from the material world to the other side. They look at it as walking through a doorway. Sure, it may have taken 2 weeks of being horribly sick with COVID, or like my dad, a year and a half of battling cancer, or like people whose children are killed in a horrifying tragedy. And we get so focused on that, and that's understandable, because we are finite beings. Everything we know has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And even though we're eternal spirits, our brain is designed for a finite state of perception. So we focus on the death and dying, whereas the spirit, once the spirit leaves the body, in other words, the brain is the hard drive that holds the program that is the soul. And once the soul leaves the brain, we revert back into a mortal living entity, and we don't really get too focused on the death and dying aspect. So I don't find, from a spiritual standpoint, there's any trauma or tragedy going on with the spirits. What I'm seeing is the pain, the shock, the trauma, the fear and all the negative emotions that are engulfing those of us who are left behind.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of what I've been receiving too, is that sometimes from some of the coronavirus souls and spirits, is that the soul leaves and you're watching sometimes the body gurgle, and it's the body kind of closing down, but the soul has exited before all of that horrendous stuff is going on to the body. And we're thinking like, oh my God, look at that body, there's soul, go ahead. And sometimes they've gone out. Is that your experience too?
If you'll indulge me, I'd like to tell a story that will explain this, and it's a snippet of what I'll be talking about this Friday at IANS, when I'm talking about shared and near-death experiences. For those of you who've read my books, you know that my mother passed, and she passed unexpectedly. She died of a heart attack, and it was a big, terrible shock to our family. And she died 14 years ago. And the funny thing is, like yesterday being Mother's Day, boy, it felt like minutes, because I had my moments, and then Mom would come to me and say, "Stop that," But watching my father die was particularly excruciating, because he had cancer and it got into his bones, and he was a Navy SEAL, he was a NASA engineer, and Dad was a tough guy, and he put up a fight. I'm so proud of him. He went through wars, he went through all sorts of conflicts, and in the end he went down fighting, and I couldn't be more proud of him. But when he died, I was there, my brother, my sister, and there was half a dozen other close friends with us. And it's really horrible when somebody's in hospice, and the hospice people, and they're really wonderful. It's a job I don't know if I particularly want. It takes a special kind of person to do that. But when someone's feet, they start kind of curling up toward the end, and I knew that, and I remember the night before I said, "He's actively dying, isn't he?" And the hospice worker said, "Yes, he is." And so it became a vigil, and the time kept clicking down and clicking down. And I'm looking at my dad, and this vivacious, energetic guy that I always knew, and he was very heavily sedated, thank God, because he had bone cancer. And then he stopped breathing. And all of a sudden, I saw this like flash of white light come right up out of his body, and the whole room got brighter. And I'm thinking, that was his spirit. And I figured, well, I was the only one that saw it. Then everybody in the room said, "What was that?" And I was the only medium there. And that's a shared death experience, because that is, everybody saw his spirit leave his body. And this is being reported all over the world. It's being reported in Muslim countries, in atheist China, in Japan, Europe, South America, Australia, everywhere. And there's several other types of phenomenon, such as seeing spirits, people who are not mediums seeing spirits, getting this sense that you're lifting up out of your body. So, there's this flash of light, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and I realized my dad wasn't breathing and he died. And of course, then we're grieving very heavily. And, we called hospice, and we called the funeral home, and that's, just horrible. And so everybody was crying, and I had to get away from everybody. So I went to one of the other rooms in the house, and I just sat down, and I was just so devastated and so defeated. And then all of a sudden I started getting that tingly sensation. And I know that sensation all very well. And I look up, and I'm like, and there standing before me is my mother and father.
Wow.
But get this. Okay, they had me, I was a complete surprise. Okay, I wasn't planned. They had me a little bit later in life, and they looked like they were maybe 20 years old, and I never saw them like this. The youngest I can remember my parents is, like almost 40. And my mom was in this long beige gown, and it sparkled. And Dad was wearing his Navy uniform, and he had that perfect V shape. And they looked down at me and they smiled, because I'm sitting there and I'm looking up at this. And then they started to glow, and they began to revolve around each other. And they started going faster and faster and faster till I couldn't distinguish their features anymore. And all of a sudden, the vibration turned into this bright gold light, then it switched to silver, and then it turned to white, and the whole room exploded in bright white light. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my God. I mean, hasn't even been an hour since my dad died. So I run out and I go in the living room, and I'm like, I just saw Mom and Dad. And my brother, he's smoking a cigarette, and he goes, would you shut up? And I won't finish that sentence. And then he realized what he'd said to me, and he goes, Mark, I'm so sorry. And he came and he put his hands on my shoulder. What did you see? And so I told everybody, and they're like, oh my God. And then it dawned on me what my parents were telling me. They were telling me, Mark, don't worry, we're pure energy. Pure energy doesn't get old, it isn't sick, it doesn't get tired, it cannot die. And that's why a lot of times people will see loved ones in spirit showing up looking like their best in their 20s. That's also coincides in near-death experiences when people die, and I mean, they come back to life, but their consciousness will leave the body. And then what happens is, we hear about going through the tunnel and then into the light, and there's loved ones who died, and the loved ones always look like they're in their 20s and early 30s. Mm-hmm. And it's because they're pure energy. And I remember one of the encounters I had with my mother, and she showed up looking young and beautiful, and I said, Mom, why do you do that? And she said, because I can. But if you think about it, that does make sense. And what we also have to realize is that spirits don't have a body, all right, like we do. They will project an image to us so we can understand them. And you've probably experienced this, Reverend Hope, in communicating with a spirit. Initially, when they appear to us, they will look like they did prior to passing. Because let's say that your mother or father was 90 years old, dying of cancer. All right, if they showed up looking 20 initially, you'd be like, who are you? What they do is they show up initially with identifiers. It's the same thing when people who, like women who've lost a child in utero, and the baby, and if the baby shows up looking 35 years old, a successful Wall Street professional, would be like, and you are? But because the spirit of a baby, even a fetus, isn't inarticulate. Spirits existed before the body. They're immortal living beings. They're incredibly intelligent and patched into the collective consciousness that is the other side. And they can present information that far exceeds the scope of anything they knew in this world. And so that's why they do these things, to let us know we're pure energy. We're just fine.
Let's talk a little bit, because I read this paper about voltage. The electromagnetics is a voltage, because when we talk about happiness, it's certain megahertz, and when we talk about sadness, it's a certain megahertz. So in your understanding, is it possible to raise, like when we talk about pure consciousness, when the spirit leaves the body, which is pure consciousness or megahertz, and that, so can it go up and down?
Sure, absolutely. And I'd say the best example for us to understand that, I'm going to ask all the viewers, listeners, how many of you have had a visitation in the dream state, or a deceased loved one comes and you communicate with that person, and doesn't it feel real? And you'll wake up and you swear, oh my gosh, that was Cousin Joe. Well, the fact of the matter is it was real, because there's a difference between a dream and a visitation. And the reason that I'm using this example, Reverend Hope, is we now know through modern technology that our brain waves change frequency depending on what we're doing. And there's 4 basic types of brain waves. There's beta, which is the state that we're in now. That's the conscious state. That's one where it makes us get up, go to work, brush our teeth, balance our checkbook, and drive our car. Then when we start to either meditate or drift off to a more relaxed state, that's alpha. Okay, I like to call alpha the groovy baby state. It's like, yeah, baby, I feel great, And it's like when we meditate, we're trying to generate alpha waves. But then when you go from beta to alpha, the next level is theta. And then there's delta, which is very low brainwave activity. But alpha theta border is extremely important because theta is sleep, alpha is the meditative state. And from studies where people's brains have been positronic emission tomography and quantitative electroencephalograms where you measure brainwave frequency, it's on the alpha theta border that spirit communication can occur and also that psychic activity can occur. So our brainwave frequency alters and it peaks. Well, spirits, being pure energy, they pick up on this. So here's the spirit's frequency, here's our brainwave, ours is going up, and the spirit brings theirs down. We get a frequency match, and that's why they like to come to people in dreams, because what happens is our brain is naturally receptive to it. And see, when we're in the beta state and all of a sudden you see a loved one appear before you. Now, see, being a medium, I knew what was going on when my parents appeared, and I didn't, panic and say, oh, go away. I wanted the experience to continue. But a lot of people will panic. Whereas in the dream state, that doesn't happen. And, the dream state, for thousands of years, people have recorded how loved ones will come and talk to them. So that's part of how the other side will adjust their frequency to come down from the higher vibration to our lower and slower vibration to get that match.
Let's talk a little bit about reincarnation. Does reincarnation, in your understanding, does it ever end?
Oh boy, well, having been raised Catholic, I was really hoping that at some point I'd get to enter the Michelangelo painting
Yes.
with the harps and the red wine and the clouds. Catholic, probably the bingo game. But sorry if I'm offending anyone. That was a joke. Oh, you'd be surprised what people say. I've asked. And because we all know from Hinduism and Buddhism, because they've been studying reincarnation for thousands of years, and the objective is to not get born again. In other words, to be done with the material world. I love the song George Harrison wrote, Living in the Material World. To get out of this place through, he says the Lord Sri Krishna or God's grace. And that's the point of reincarnation. But my understanding, based on the communication of what spirits have told me, I said, so when we're done here, do we have to come back? And the response was, not to this dimension, not to this world. I said, what does that mean? They said, well, you transfer to another planet, to another dimension, and a new cycle begins. And I was like, well, how long does that go on? And then they said, well, that's what it is, Mark. Energy is eternal. Is it an eternal energy? I go, don't we ever get to be with God? They said, you're always with God. I said, yeah, but, do we ever get to, and I got the distinct impression they're kind of laughing at me because the response was, why do you worry of such things? It is better to focus on what you are doing, where you are now, because you are where you are supposed to be right now. So my understanding of reincarnation is that when we're done with our incarnations on planet Earth, then we either do some type of quantum leap to another dimension or we transfer to another planet, however it works. And I've heard, I was giving a lecture one time and there was somebody there and she was a college professor, a very nice lady, but she goes, well, there's a fallacy in that, because there are more people alive now than have existed in all of human history combined. And what's funny is the spirits had already told me about that. And I said, so now you're assuming Earth is a closed system and that only the souls that are here right now are the souls that will ever be here. Earth, souls are coming in and leaving on a constant basis. So we're not a closed system. We're merely a stop in the eternal journey of the soul. So that in a nutshell is my understanding. of reincarnation. As much as I'd like it all to be done, then we get to hang out in heaven, and certainly, you know, going to the other side is a euphoric and blissful, and it's wonderful being part of a purely energetic state. But for various reasons beyond my comprehension, we appear to either want to or have to return to corporeal form for various reasons.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So let's go with the definition of light workers. Do you believe a lot of people are incarnate on the planet at this time from different planetary systems that have come here with a very high voltage of consciousness to help with what's happening here on the planet?
Well, I'd say we've certainly had examples throughout history of such people. I would say Gandhi falls into that category. I would say Mother Teresa did. I'd say Billy Graham did, you know. I'd say Yogananda, Paramahansa, certainly Buddha, Christ, Krishna, St. Francis of Assisi. There have been many people throughout history and today who are selfless and do great works of piety and charity. And then, of course, there's also the dark energies that walk among us too, because how could we possibly understand or see the light if it were not for the darkness?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Have you cracked any cases since you're a working attorney? Has there been any, while you're on an attorney, whatever you call a case, I guess, not an attorney thing, but a case?
Cold
Yeah,
case.
cold case.
The doctors was a biggie. And, you know, it's funny because the information I gave the family, I did the reading on the show, and they went back to Phoenix and gave it to the police, and wham bam, a few months later, they had an arrest, and everything that I said was what happened. And of course, we told the producers on the doctors, like, well, we'll wait till the guy goes to trial. Maybe we'll have you back on. So I forgive them. And then I was on another case in Kentucky where in the reading I did for the family, it's a very macabre situation. I even got the name of the suspected killer, where it happened, how it happened, why it happened. And that case is still a cold case, but that's very macabre, and I really don't want to go into the details about that, only because a lot of people who have come close to the killer to solve the case disappear and or end up dead. So I'd prefer not to comment on that. But the mainstay of my work, I mean, certainly if people come to me with a cold case, I'm happy to help. But the mainstay of what I do is facilitate communication between people in this world and their loved ones in spirit. And spirit communication is a gift from God, despite what religious fanatics say. They get all testy about that. And it's because that religious leaders want people to be shackled to Bronze Age and Iron Age paranoid superstitions and beliefs that there's one and only way to get to God, and of course it's through my church, my belief system, and by the way, you have to tithe 10% of your income. And you know, in my studies around the world, I've studied Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Native Americanism, in both in North America, Central America, and South America, Taoism, and several other belief systems around the world. It's hard for me to believe there's one and only one way. I can't believe that God, the infinite vast energy that connects everyone, everything in existence, that connects not only everyone on Earth, but Earth to our sun, and our sun to other stars, and this galaxy to other galaxies, and not only just universe to multiverses, wants the entire creation being interpreted to the Church of the Right Wing on Oak Street in Yeehaw County. I mean, I just have a really hard time swallowing that narrow-minded concept. And I know that there's people who will disagree with me, and they have a right to do that. But when you begin to study this, you realize that God, in my friend Dr. Raymond Moody's next book, I love the title of it, God is bigger than the Bible. Okay, God's a lot bigger than the Bible, and even the word God is too limiting.
So what do you think is a spiritual, or do any masters, you know, and I read your book and you pray to Saint Anthony every day because,
Well, I don't pray to saints. I may ask for their guidance and assistance. And so
okay,
I didn't mean to interrupt
yeah,
because a lot of people think and yes, I was raised Catholic, but I consider myself a Catholic, Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish, Native American, Taoist hybrid. Okay, I believe that there are many paths to God, and that we should rejoice in all of them and not use them as reasons to divide us, but rather to unite us. And but there are avatars, and it's funny because anyone who's Catholic knows that if you lose your car keys or you lose something, you always say, Saint Anthony, help me find my keys.
yeah,
And it's like 9 times out of 10, it's like, oh my God, you find them right there. And it's funny and how things like that happen. But Catholics don't pray to saints. We don't worship Mary, the mother of Jesus. We look at saints as spiritual guides, and Mary has an exalted position in the Catholic faith. But that's the Catholic faith, and I'm not here to argue the virtues or defend that. I'm just explaining what it is. Whereas, the Buddhists, when you look at Buddha and Jesus, they were so very similar. Both of them came from princely lines. Jesus was a descendant of King David through his mother Mary. So he was from a regal bloodline. See, when you look in the Bible, it starts to make sense. Herod the Great was very paranoid about the birth of a member of the house of David. Okay, so that's why he wanted to eliminate all those babies. It wasn't just, Herod was a horrible person anyway. I do a whole presentation on Herod and on the Star of Bethlehem as an astrological alignment. But there were reasons why he did what he did. Meanwhile, Buddha was the son of a king, and he was sheltered from the miseries of the world. And when he was a teenager, he slipped out of the palace and he saw that the life he'd been living was nothing more than an illusion, and that life was fraught with suffering. Both of these young men went into the wilderness for 40 days. Jesus for 40, I think Buddha was like 44, 46. Both were tempted. Jesus by quote unquote Satan, Buddha by Mara, the Lord of Illusion. What I think is that it wasn't so much that there was some type of negative entity taunting them, so much as it was their evolution spiritually and realizing there was a choice to follow the ego and the way of materialism and wealth and exploit their bloodline, or to follow the path of the spirit. You can interpret that any way, but I find it very interesting that two of the greatest spiritual teachers had so very much in common.
Mm-hmm. Are you getting any information about the spiritual reason why we are going through the pandemic that we are going through at this time?
Absolutely. And the best way I can explain this, and indulge me for being flippant for a moment, but George Lucas, who created Star Wars, when he was 16 years old, he had a near-death experience. He was in a car accident and he died. He was flatlined for 20 minutes. And then at the hospital, all of a sudden he came back to life. I mean, as far as they were concerned, he was DOA when they got him dead on arrival at the hospital. Within a few years of that, in his early 20s, he had a draft of Star Wars. Now, we've all heard the expression, may the force be with you, right? We've all heard that one. That's part of pop culture now. But when you examine the force, George Lucas talks about the energy which binds and connects everyone and everything in the universe, and it has positive and negative aspects to it. In other words, what he's discussing is quantum physics, which we know on a subatomic level, everything is at its most basic unit, quanta, which is smaller than electrons, protons, and neutrons. It's the smallest unit, and it's electromagnetic energy, and that everything is electromagnetic energy and vibrates at different frequencies so as to be perceptible to the senses. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, in the initial Star Wars movie, the dark side of the Force, they have the Death Star and they destroy this planet. And Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Jedi Knight, the Gandhi of Star Wars, if you will, he says, there's been a great disruption in the Force. And he feels a shockwave when this entire world has been destroyed. All of my colleagues, we get on the phone and we talk to each other, we're all feeling that there's a huge shockwave going through us because of the COVID-19 virus. And that's what I'm feeling. And this is a lesson being presented to us on a planetary scale by a power far greater than any of us. And I'm very well aware of all the conspiracy theories that Bill Gates and George Soros did it, that China did it through 5G, that it's a genetically engineered virus, whatever. There have been plagues throughout human history. The last one of this magnitude was in 1918, the Spanish flu, and before that it was 1665. Anyway, here's the lesson. What have we seen while the world is in quarantine? The air is cleaner, the water is cleaner. For the first time in nearly 5 centuries, dolphins were spotted in the canals of Venice, because Venice's canals are so notoriously polluted. But now there's fish there again, and dolphins. People in Mumbai, India, can actually see the mountain range, whereas before all they saw was smog. People in China going outside in industrial areas, which, because the industry has been closed down, not wearing masks. Even my friends in LA said, we never realized how blue the sky was. So what did this show us? This showed us that we can make a difference. How? Because for the first time in human history, and this is unprecedented, all of our scientists, all of our biological experts, all of our medical experts are sharing data and information worldwide. They're working on a vaccine, on treatments for this virus. And our scientists are the brain trust of humanity for the first time ever is working together. Scientists like sharing ideas and sharing their information and learning from each other. And so what we're being taught is that we can use our brain trust. This is the gift God gave us, is our brain. And we can solve pollution. We can develop cleaner forms of energy. Maybe we can clean up how we use fossil fuel. Maybe we can replace it. Maybe we can start reforesting the earth. Maybe we can work on population and food production, and all do it in a way without an environmental impact, because the technology already exists. So we're being given a chance right now to have our scientists work on helping humanity instead of figuring out ways to kill each other. I just found another very interesting development. 3 of the Gulf states, Muslim countries, United Arab Republics, I believe Bahrain, and I believe Kuwait, are now working with the Israeli healthcare system on COVID-19. Well, maybe this is a small step, and of course the UAE and Bahrain and Kuwait. I mean, they're not Iran, they're not one of the aggressor states or Saudi Arabia, but it's a start. What have we heard before that Muslim Arab countries are working with Israel? Their scientists are sharing information. So this is the disruption in our force. Yes, COVID-19 is horrible. It breaks my heart to see all these people dying, and it's a dreadful death. But we're being given a chance to finally use our technology for peaceful, clean alternatives to what we've been doing.
Thank you for that. It gives us all hope when we hear something like that, of people coming together and joining their forces together.
Well, we should have hope. And the thing is, I've had the privilege and the great honor in my life. I've met Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, John Glenn, and Captain Mike Foreman. And each one of the stories is funny. All right, how I met all these guys. But I've asked them, what was it like? What was it like to see the Earth from outer space? And all of them, they get this look in their eye. It was great. John Glenn was like, oh my God. He was like so like into it. And he said, You know, Mark, he said, looking down and seeing how alive our planet is, and then it dawns on you, this is the only place we have to live. Okay. And you know, for centuries, it's always been one country trying to conquer other countries. And now our technology has increased where we can kill everybody and everything on this planet in about 20 minutes. And so the divine power has sent a shockwave through the force and said, there is a different way. And based on the way humans are, it can't be through, oh, let's all join hands and sing Kumbaya, because we know that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's a common threat. And our enemy is an insidious disease that spreads like wildfire. And unlike human beings, it doesn't play the us versus they syndrome. It'll kill anybody. It doesn't discriminate on the basis of race, creed, color, orientation, anything. And so that is the unifying factor in what humanity can rally behind to actually realize, you know, we can work together.
Yeah, because in our state, we have Mike Osterholm, that used to be the kind of the leading head honcho, maybe he still is, of Minnesota. And he says this is the second inning of a 9-inning game. And so I always hear that it's going to continue as a divine grace from the universe. Again, I gave a sermon yesterday, and I want to become Olympic star with optimism. So I call it a gift from divine grace to wake us all up at this time and to work together and collaborate together. And that's the reason why I started these Zoom meetings, is to have high caliber, integral beings like yourself to come on and talk and give people a little hope about what's going on. So are you bombarded with spirits or information from the other side right now that you are being asked to give out, or?
Well, I turn it on and turn it off, and we all have to, because people always say, God, wherever you go, there's just a parade of spirits. Well, it depends like where I am, or what I'm doing. But they know when I'm doing this and when I'm not doing this, you know. So when I open up my brain to frequencies, then they'll come in. But there are always exceptions to that. It's like when I visited Ground Zero in Manhattan a couple years ago, and I knew what I was getting into because I'd been to Dachau concentration camp when I was a teenager. I wrote about that, Never Letting Go. So I knew when I was going to Ground Zero. And it's not that there are spirits hanging out there. See, people think that, oh, this area is haunted. What it is, matter retains vibration. And so when a hugely horrific and traumatic event occurs, the vibration, it's like an echo that never ends. And so when you have 3,000 people die in one fell swoop, that's some pretty heavy duty energy going on there. And basically I could handle it for about a half hour. Because I could just feel the pain and the death. I got a funny story, not about 9/11. There's nothing funny about that. But I was at the Tower of London about 8 years ago, and I was there by myself. I was in England, and I was studying over there. And it was a cold, dreary day in February. I mean, what you would expect in London in February.
Yeah.
And I decided I had the day off, so I go, I'm going to go to the Tower of London, and I'm walking around, and I was freezing, and I decided I'd sit down. And I kept thinking about Anne Boleyn, because I like history, and Henry VIII is one of those gnarly rulers from history. And I go, God, I know that she was beheaded. I wonder if it was around here. God, I wonder where Anne Boleyn was beheaded. And all of a sudden, I get this feeling, and I look over to my left and down, and there's this glass sign right, I swear, right next to the bench I'm sitting on, and engraved in it says, "This be the site where Queen Anne Boleyn was beheaded by order of King Henry VIII." It was one of those kind of moments, you know, and I'm like half freaking out, half laughing, going, well, I guess this was it, you know. And
So how can all of us get into attunement so we can connect with with those on the other side, or with our helpers on the other side? What can we do to connect on that highway?
Well, the standard answer is prayer and meditation, and the standard answers are absolutely correct. Prayer is when we talk to God, and prayer doesn't necessarily have to be, a rote prayer. Being Catholic, and it's funny because we say these when we do the Rosary. You're supposed to say, "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord," Hail Mary, full of grace, so it becomes like this. Whereas like the Hindus, so like Hari Rama, Hari Rama, Hari, and there's this repetitive mantras, prayers. But what happens is, once again, frequency, vibration. You're getting into this vibration where you begin to raise your vibration, not get caught up in the stress and the drudgery of living in the material world. And meditation is when you listen to God. And meditation doesn't have to be these long, lengthy processes. It could be 4 or 5 minutes even, just where you breathe in and breathe out and just try to let go of things that are making you aggravated. And what happens when you meditate, you can focus on, well, is there anybody in spirit around me, and see who comes forward. And it takes a lot of practice. I'd say one of the most important things, though, is when you do have a spiritual experience, please don't cross-examine the spirit. Okay? And that's from my legal career. It's like, you'll have a spiritual experience, and it's like, so, this couldn't be true. I must be making it up. I'm in a profound state of grief, so it's probably my imagination. Oh, there's a lot of reasons why I'm smelling my mother's perfume, even though there's absolutely no perfume bottles anywhere around me. Oh, it was a coincidence that I turned on the radio and that just happened to be my brother's favorite song, my brother who died. Okay, when you start doing that, you're flooding the energetic field with negativity. It's like when I do readings, I tell people, you'll see on all my videos, I say, don't say no. And they'll be like, does that make sense? No, no, no. And I say, that's the no, no, no syndrome, where you're generating this negative barrier. It's better to say, I'm not sure, let me think about it, because after the reading, it's like a flower and it begins to unfold and reveal itself. And then you'll say, oh, that's what that meant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk just a little bit, because I do believe that the spirits are speaking to us and the masters are coming. And lots of times people struggle with spiritual etiquette, spirit etiquette. And so they'll walk up to somebody and they'll say, I have a message for you. I have a spirit coming in.
Yeah. If you want to demonstrate, first off, there should be some ethics and professionalism to being a medium. And just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something. So if you're at a grocery store and there's some lady there picking out broccoli, and all of a sudden you pick up on her deceased husband around her and you go up and throw that at her, first off, she's there to pick out broccoli, not to cope with the death of her husband. Spirit communication should be approached with reverence. And so don't just go up and give somebody a message unless they're receptive to it and open to it. What if that person's an evangelical religious fanatic and they start slinging the book of Deuteronomy at you, and they take it as a personal affront and that you're demonic? It's the sign of an inexperienced, unprofessional medium. I get that from a lot of younger mediums. I go up to people all the time and I tell people this: you don't do things like that.
Yeah.
Because spirits will come up to you. I was on an airplane and I was flying up to Newark, New Jersey, and there's this guy sitting next to me, and his mother's spirit kept coming through to me. And we were making some polite conversation, and it was like, what are you doing? He goes, I'm in the entertainment industry. And his mother's like, oh, come on, he's a wise guy. You need to tell him that I'm around, and that, and I'm like, right. All right, I'm hearing this spirit. It's like, really, lady? I mean, ma'am, I'm going to talk to your husband, the mafia wise guy, that his mother in spirit wants to give him a message. I just closed my eyes and said, with all due respect, you're going to have to find another conduit, And it was funny. I was telling my manager that after the flight, and she was cracking up. She goes, I was wondering what was going on with you, because you turned like all the color drained from your face, And it's not that this guy was not deserving of hearing from his mother, but that was inappropriate. That was inappropriate.
Yeah. Because you have done your work around the world, haven't you? You've been internationally.
I have. I've been, to Asia, South America, Central America, Europe, of course, and all over the United States. And it's, when people are open and receptive, then that's when you deliver the message. It's like when people say, well, I want to gift a reading to somebody and it'll be a total surprise. No.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. This isn't a surprise party or, a trip to a restaurant. It's like, hi, surprise. Now you have to deal with your grief. It's like you don't do that to somebody. If you're going to give somebody the gift of a reading, you need to find out first if they're open and receptive to spirit communication so that they'll get the maximum out of it. Because some people, women tend to be more receptive and open to this than men, although I'm seeing a lot more men, because the thing is, guys, we hurt too. And even though men may not visibly or publicly cry, that doesn't mean that we don't. And one of the things that I try to teach men in my presentations and in my lectures is that crying is healthy. Now, we've been socialized that it's unmanly and somehow it makes you servile and weak if you cry. But recent studies from Minnesota at the, I think it was the University of Minnesota, and also at USC, University of Southern California, found that the chemical composition of tears of grief are different than regular tears, what they call reflex tears, like sneezing from pollen or whatever. Because they contain the neurotransmitters that cause depression. And so that's why when you're grieving and you cry and you have that big cry afterwards, you will feel physically exhausted and also a bit of relief. And it's because we're designed to do this. So when you cry, you're actually getting out of you the chemicals that are making you depressed. So guys, it's not unmanly to cry. We have hearts, feelings, and tear ducts for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Speak to us a little bit about your program that you're going to be doing on May 15th. It's called Shared Death Experiences, the New Frontier in Afterlife Research. That's going to be online.
Yeah, that's being hosted by IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies. I've been a keynote speaker 3 years in a row at IANS, and they asked me if I would be part of their Stellar Speakers program online because, of course, their national convention had to be canceled this year. And near-death experiences are when, and I had one when I was 4, is when somebody dies and you separate from the body, you get the sensation you're going through the tunnel into the light, you'll encounter deceased loved ones, and if you go even further, you're going to encounter the divine power that we call God. And I'm giving you a Cliff Notes version of that. And the skeptics have been saying, well, this is just a byproduct of a dying brain and that there's nothing spiritual about it. But shared death experiences are like the situation that happened when my father died, that all of a sudden the room got brighter for a few seconds and everybody in the room saw it. Also, there have been reports worldwide of how while somebody is dying, people who are not mediums, family members, close friends, hospice workers, have actually seen the spirits of relatives and friends of the deceased, of the person who's dying around them. And what's happening here is we're talking about the frequency, is that as a person is in the transition between leaving their body and going to the other side energetically, there's that vibrational frequency alignment. And so bystanders, even those who are not mediums, get caught up in that and they start having the experience of the dying person without them dying. And so that's it in the Cliff Notes format. And in my work as a medium, I've been at the bedside of a number of people who have died, and I've observed this. The family wanted me there, to see what spirits were coming through, and also to ease. It's a tremendously difficult and the most rewarding work imaginable. You know, people are always asking me, well, don't you miss the full-time practice of law? It's like, really? Um, you know, and law certainly has its perks, but to help somebody as they're dying, to not be so afraid and to bring comfort to their family, I'm sorry, but as for me, there's no greater calling.
I would agree. I've been, I must have had some soul contracts with a lot of people because I've been with them as they've taken their last breath. And, you know, I have all these babies that I pushed out of my body that I thought was the greatest thing in the world. But watching someone birth themselves out of their body is just like 10 million trillion times greater. It's just phenomenal. It's just phenomenal.
It really is. And, you know, Reverend Hope, I want to thank you for doing that. And also the work that you do and the work that I do and our colleagues, the legitimate mediums, is that we're helping people understand that when someone we love dies, it's not the end of our relationship, but rather it transforms from one of a physical nature to one of a spiritual nature. So we're always going to be interconnected with them. And I get people all the time who are saying, but are they alone? Will they be there when I pass? Spirits can never be alone. Okay, we're never alone. It's just that because our vibration's lower and slower, we're not aware of all the spirits that are around us in the energetic interconnection with the other side. Spirits do see that, so they're not alone, and they will be there, even if they've reincarnated, and that's a whole nother discussion.
Any questions, any burning questions that you might have before we close off tonight? Anybody have any questions that you
It'd be nice to take a couple questions from the chat room.
I'll go if if no one else wants to.
Go for it, kiddo.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for being here today. And so, and I ask this question quite often because it's something that me and Amy, who's also on here, and other women that are going through are trying to birth babies into the world, but we're having a hard time getting pregnant or having miscarriages and things like that. Do you have any advice, or like do spirit babies come through, or any advice on that?
Can you reframe the question? I'm not really sure exactly what your question is. No. I mean, sure. I think I do, but I want to make sure I understand it.
Okay. So just pretty much like, just spirit babies come through that are on the other side, that have passed or that are waiting to come into this world.
Oh, okay. No, now I understand. Yes. What happens when I do a reading is if I see what looks like a star around somebody, that's a baby that either has not come in yet, or who the woman lost in utero or very close after being born. And I've often wondered why they appear as a star. Now, a lot of people refer to orbs. Orb is a ball of light, and that's what a spirit is. And so when that orb begins transmitting information into my brain, then I'll get a visual on, if that person was an adult or whatever. And I think that they give the image of an orb because it's a trigger for me to understand that this was a baby, a spirit baby. Secondly, they weren't tainted, if you will, by a material world existence. And I've had many times babies come through that somebody lost. I remember one they're all poignant, they're all very heavy. I was in New York City and I had a publicist at the time, and he wanted this reporter to meet me, and she was a real skeptic, and it was for the, it was the New York Post. It was one of those real, kind of really tough magazines. And we're in this restaurant, we're in the back, and it's kind of noisy. He says, well, do a reading on her. And it's like, all right, so we're at a diner and do this reading. And all of a sudden I got her husband coming through, and I started explaining about this heart attack and what was going on, and the tears are coming. And then all of a sudden a star appeared, and I go, and I'm getting baby girl that you lost, and this woman completely fell apart. What had happened is her husband had a heart attack when she was like, I think she was like 4 or 5 months pregnant, and she went to the hospital. He died, and she was so upset, then she miscarried. She lost her husband and her little girl within the span of like 30 minutes, and they both came through. And I remember my publicist, he's like, holy, I won't finish that. But and he didn't even know this. I mean, he knew that her husband had died, but he didn't know that she'd miscarried the baby. And it was really beautiful because her husband and the baby girl were together, and they were expressing how they felt her sorrow and the crushing weight of their passing. And it was a very humbling experience for me. But yes, they do come through quite often. It's funny too because I'll be doing a reading for somebody. I go, "There's a little boy," and one goes, "Well, I don't have any kids. I'm trying to get pregnant." I go, "There's a little boy."
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Hey, Mark, a couple questions came over, and we don't want to necessarily get political, but are you getting any information from the guides about our election that will be coming up in November and how that's going to take place?
I'm going to pass on that one. Because I have too many personal feelings involved that clouds my objectivity. How's that?
I get your drift. I get your drift. So right now, as you're sitting there, do you have guide spirits that want to come through you to give a message to the group that happens to be tuned in right now?
What's so funny is as soon as you said that, and I know it's the Hope Interfaith Center, the message is keep the faith, keep the faith. And by keeping the faith, it's more than just, going to a church or following a particular belief system. It's having faith in yourself. Keep the faith in yourself that you are stronger than you think you are. And though you may bend, you will not break. And that's the message, is keep the faith, keep the faith. It keeps getting repeated. And it's really easy right now to have no faith and to be afraid. I mean, even though we're opening up now, and honestly, here's where I will get political, we're doing this way too soon. The experts have all said the middle of June, let's contain this thing. It'll start burning itself out. And I understand people needing to get back to work. And I think that the government needs to be subsidizing workers as opposed to big corporations that have financial assets. But that's as far as I'll go politically. But right now, people are afraid. And even though we are opening up, they're saying that, they're not, I mean, really, how many people are going to go to a restaurant right now? How many people are going to go and get a haircut right now? People are afraid, but we have to keep the faith. And here's why. Now, this is the logical part of Mark walking in. If history's taught us anything, it's that all bad times eventually come to an end, whether it's economic, military, or with a pandemic. Every plague throughout human history has been horrible, but eventually it comes to an end. During the reign of Henry VIII, since we were talking about Anne Boleyn earlier, and he was in the late 1400s, very early 1500s, there was this disease they called the sweating sickness. And still today, doctors don't know what it was. And people would start sweating. So I'm presuming they were having a really high fever, and then people would just die. Actually, Anne Boleyn had it and survived it. I guess one of the reasons Henry thought, well, then she'll be able to give me a baby, which she did, actually, but it was a girl. Anyway, but the thing is, the sweating sickness terrified people. The bubonic plague a few centuries before that in Europe, and of course, the conspiracy theorists of the day said it was demons, when actually it was the bacteria carried by the fleas that were on rats. Then there was the Great Plague of 1665, which swept through Europe. And while in self-quarantine and isolation, Sir Isaac Newton used his time wisely. He invented calculus, he developed the laws of gravity, and he also refined and developed the laws of optics. Then there was the Spanish flu of 1918, which killed more people than World War I. Why? Because at the end of World War I, people weren't social isolating. They all went into the streets to celebrate in Times Square and at every big population center in the US, and they all reinfected each other, and then it took an even heavier toll. So yes, we must keep the faith. We must be smart about this. This is not a hoax. This is not a conspiracy. If and when you go out in public, use a mask. I was at the grocery store the other day. A bunch of people have their mask on underneath their nose. Now, what part of an airborne disease are they missing? Put the freaking mask over your nose. But I'm serious. It's like, come on, people. God gave us a gift. It's between our ears.
The next question I'm supposed to ask is, do you do private readings?
Absolutely. In fact, if people go to my website, evidenceofeternity.com, kindly sign up for my newsletter. Also, you'll see book a phone reading with Mark, and as I'm sure you can attest, Reverend Hope, phone readings are just as accurate as in-person readings because spirits are pure electromagnetic energy. They're zipping back and forth between us at the speed of light. And I'm extending this offer of a reduced fee session for all people who, when they apply for a reading, they have to mention Reverend Hope or the Hope Interfaith Center in the application on my website, and my assistant will make arrangements for the reduced fee session. But you have to mention Reverend Hope or the Hope Interfaith Center in the application. And my website is evidenceofeternity.com, just like my book, Evidence of Eternity.
Great, thank you. Thank you for doing that too, Mark. I appreciate that. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I mean, first off, thank you for having me on the show. Thank all of you for listening. And I've got to do my part during this too. I mean, there's a lot of my colleagues that are charging $1,000 for a reading and stuff like that. And it's like, yes, we have to pay our bills and make a living. But the thing is, I feel that you've rewarded me by listening to what I have to say. And so in turn, I'm extending reduced fee sessions for people who mentioned Reverend Hope and the Hope Interfaith Center.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Just before anybody clicks off, I want you to know that we're having something exciting on Thursday. It's Kids Day. I thought it would be interesting to have kids come on and give their view on COVID-19. And that's sometimes what we do is, all these 2 months that we've had experts of high calibration, and that we don't give kids a platform of talking about their grief or their worry or their doubt, or even perhaps they're getting a lot of information that they would like to share. So on Thursday, my Bella, who is 15, Matthew, who is 12, and anybody else who has children who would like to have a platform where we would ask them questions, because I'm always asking my grandchildren questions about, like, what is your biggest fear right now? Do you grieve right now? And so we wanted to make sure at the Hope Interfaith Center that we gave kids a platform. So we'll be doing that on Thursday at our Zoom meeting. So come and join us then to support those kids who will be on the program with us. And if you know of any other kids who'd like to be on that platform and give their information and guidance to adults that sometimes need guidance and adults from those kids, it would be wonderful to support them. It'd be wonderful to support them. Once again, Mark, also next Monday, we're having the Chinos come on. They had said yes. They're going to do a galactic, I've got it written down on my notes someplace. They're going to speak and do a sound journey with us on next Monday. So we are quite fortunate to have people say yes, 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 yes. So again, Mark, thank you so much. And when this is all over, I'll just give you a virtual hug right now. And thank you so
Everyone,
much.
virtual hug, everybody.
Yeah, virtual hug, everybody. There you go. Oh,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you so
everybody.
much.
God bless you. God bless you.
Namaste. Namaste. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, you guys. See you on Thursday.
Bye.
Thursday for Kid Day. Bye. Yeah.